Welcome back, survivor. If you can hear this, it means you're still alive. This is Jack's Nightmares, and this is your next story. It was just after 11:30 when I first tapped the brakes. Nothing sudden, just a slowdown ahead. I was heading westbound, 6 hours into the run, somewhere between two minor exits with no real landmarks. The load was standard freight, retail pallets, mostly dry goods. Trailer was sealed, no refrigeration unit. I hadn't hit any traffic all day until now, and the climb ahead wasn't steep enough to cause this kind of jam. I downshifted and gave the wheel a small shake to wake myself up. One lane stopped, then both. Just like that, we were parked. I rolled to a stop behind a blue hatchback and set the parking brake, checked both mirrors, then leaned out to get a sense of the shoulder. No movement behind me. The left lane was jammed with sedans and pickups, most with drivers still sitting behind the wheel, arms crossed or staring at their phones. Nobody seemed panicked. Nobody honking yet. Looked like another wreck up the line, maybe 2 or 3 exits ahead. I toggled the CB just in case someone had details, and sure enough, chatter was already rolling. "Looks like a pile-up near 49, someone said. "Highway patrol blocking the ramp." Another voice jumped in, older driver by the sound of it. "Air care went overhead 10 minutes ago. Saw 2 wrecks and what looked like a jackknifed reefer. Ain't nobody moving for a while." None of it sounded urgent. Annoying, sure, but not the kind of thing to make me second-guess staying put. I glanced down at the dash. 62% diesel, 28% DEF, engine temp fine. 5 hours left on my ELD before break. I dealt with worse. I took a drink from the thermos and started logging the stop in my notebook. Nothing out of the ordinary yet, but that didn't last. 20 minutes in, people started leaving their vehicles. Not many at first. A man stepped out of a Ford SUV up ahead, looked around, then jogged up the shoulder. Another guy climbed the center barrier, crossed over to eastbound traffic and kept going. A woman pulled her stroller between the cars and looked lost. I turned the fan off and cracked the window to listen. Still no sirens, no helicopters, no yelling. But something was wrong. You could feel it. A few cars ahead, a family exited their minivan. Father, mother, 2 kids under 10. The father pulled out 2 backpacks from the rear seat and clipped one onto his daughter like he had rehearsed it. Then they started walking, not toward anything, just away, the wrong direction too, uphill, into the heat. At that point, I reached for the CB again. It had quieted down. Too quiet. The usual complaints had vanished. Someone said the cops had turned back all traffic at the last 3 exits. Another driver mentioned a lockdown back in Columbus. None of it made sense. The tone had shifted. No more jokes. Every voice sounded tight. Then came the knock. Passenger side. Startled me. I looked over and saw a guy standing there, no older than 25, wearing a college hoodie soaked with sweat. His eyes were red, not from infection, just dry, irritated. I cracked the window. "You got any water?" he asked, voice raspy. "Anything?" I pulled a sealed bottle from the cooler and passed it through. He grabbed it like it weighed nothing. "Thanks, man," he said, then bolted without another word. I wrote it down in my notebook. 1 bottle, young male. I didn't know why I did that. Just a way to stay focused. Then the radio cut out. Whatever station I'd been on froze mid-song. A second later, the emergency alert tone came on. Long, high-pitched, too loud for the speakers. The kind you usually hear during a tornado warning. Then a recorded voice. Calm, male, Eastern accent. "This is the emergency alert system. A statewide shelter-in-place order has been issued. Violent disturbances reported in several metropolitan areas. Please remain inside your vehicle and await official instructions. Do not engage with individuals displaying erratic or aggressive behavior." It repeated twice, then silence. Not even static. That's when I noticed the car ahead of me moving again, but not in the right way. The driver, a man in his 30s, started banging his forehead against the windshield, not gently, full swings. Blood smeared the inside glass. I stayed in the cab and didn't move. He stopped, slumped forward, then suddenly kicked open his door and collapsed out. His shirt was soaked. He stood up slowly, feet uneven, then staggered toward the next vehicle and slammed into it face first. The woman inside that car screamed. She started reversing, hit the car behind her, then slammed it into park and ducked down out of sight. I reached forward and locked both doors. Then I pulled the curtain behind my seat halfway shut. Not enough to block all light, but enough to break the shape of my silhouette. The infected, if that's what he was, had already turned toward the woman's car, arms dragging. More movement ahead, not running, just slow, stiff walking between the rows of cars. 3, maybe 4 people. None looked right. Their clothes were torn, arms swinging wrong, and not a single one looked aware of where they were. That's when the CB came to life again. Red truck, Cascadia. About 10 cars behind you, man just jumped on someone's hood. Get ready to move when we do. I knew he meant me. I turned the key halfway to let the pressure cycle. I could hear the compressor kick in, waited for the air system to charge up. Gauges climbed slowly, 95 pounds and steady, engine temp holding. I pushed in the parking brake knob and stayed ready. I still couldn't go anywhere. Car in front, rig behind. If I moved, I'd crush someone. There wasn't a clean gap anywhere around me. That's when the infected slammed into my passenger door. I didn't see where he came from. The whole cab shook. He pounded with both fists, then started smearing something down the window. I grabbed the tire thumper, but didn't open the door. His eyes were wrong, glassy, sunken, no recognition at all. I hit the air horn. 1 blast, then 2 shorter ones. No change. He kept hitting. Eventually he wandered toward the next car, dragging his left foot like it was broken. I don't think he even knew I was there. More infected started showing up, some walking the shoulder, some crawling out from between cars. I counted at least 11 from where I sat. Most were adults, a few teenagers. No kids yet. That came later. I reached over and flipped the dome light switch off, then turned down the instrument panel backlight. I didn't want this cab glowing when the sun dipped. The trailer behind me was packed with bottled water, canned food, and shrink-wrapped pallets. The kind of stuff you see going to relief shelters. All labeled, all sealed. I thought about it. Breaking the lock meant I couldn't explain it later, but who would I even explain it to? Still, I didn't touch it. I leaned forward and called out the seal number into my dashcam, just in case. Something about it made me feel like I hadn't given up yet. Another voice broke through the CB, sharp and scared. 2 exits back, guy just tore through the window of a Civic, grabbed a woman by the throat, dragged her out. I ain't seen nothing like this. The Civic was close. I saw it. Red, compact, sunroof cracked. The driver was gone. Passenger side wide open. Blood streaked the side mirror. That's when I stopped narrating things in my head like a job and started thinking in terms of escape. Not recovery, not moving the truck, just surviving the next hour. I eased my foot down to keep pressure in the lines and started watching the mirrors more than the windshield. Every few minutes I'd flip through the dash menu to check fuel burn at idle. Couldn't afford to waste it. But I needed the engine hot in case I had to punch out of there fast. Every sound outside mattered. The creak of suspension, a car door slamming, the pop of gravel under someone's boots. It all felt magnified now. Through the mirrors, I saw shadows moving between vehicles, their outlines jagged against the afternoon glare. Somewhere ahead, a horn blared and didn't stop, the kind of steady blare that meant no one was holding it down. It went on until the power drained, then sputtered out into silence. After that, the only movement came from the stranded people trying to shift their cars to make room, or maybe to check on someone. Whatever they were doing, it wasn't working. The traffic wasn't just stopped, it was locked. I shut the AC off again to save fuel, cracked the window an inch, and listened. The infected made noise. Nothing like you'd expect. Not screams. More like an off rhythm of breathing and grunting. too slow and deliberate to be pain, too uneven to sound alive. Every few minutes, one would brush against the side of the truck, a wet drag of skin or cloth against metal. The sound ran under my nerves like static. Someone had left a radio running in a nearby car, music still playing on low volume. That ordinary sound, something as normal as a soft rock song, made the entire situation feel worse. It didn't belong here. When it cut to an emergency broadcast again, I could barely hear it through the glass, but it was the same male voice, this time less composed. Statewide law enforcement has been instructed to maintain road closures. If you are on the highway, remain inside your vehicle. Do not approach emergency personnel unless instructed. There was a pause, then a faint murmur. The cause of the violent outbreaks remains under investigation. All citizens are advised to, then static swallowed the rest. I turned up the CB volume, but all I got was panic bleeding through half-pressed mics. People yelling about blocked exits, stranded kids, and biters, which was the new word someone must have coined an hour earlier. One driver claimed the National Guard had set up a perimeter south of the interchange. Another said the Guard units themselves were pulling back. The stories didn't match, but it didn't matter. You could tell by the tone that the system had broken down somewhere way above us. A sedan 3 vehicles up started rocking side to side. Not just from someone shifting inside, the whole suspension bounced, the back door flung open, and a man crawled out backward. He landed on the asphalt, tried to stand, then fell again. From this distance, he looked drunk, staggering with his arms loose, jaw slack. Then a second figure came out after him, smaller, faster, moving with erratic. She was on top of him before I processed it. I couldn't see exactly what happened next. Just motion, and the way his legs kicked once, and then stopped. The people in the car behind them started screaming. I didn't wait to see more. I pushed the clutch, shifted into first, and rolled a foot forward just to keep the air tanks alive. My hands were steady, but my brain was already mapping escape routes. None of them looked good. The shoulder ahead had a guardrail and no gap. The left lane was jammed tight. Behind me, another semi was so close that his grille nearly kissed my doors. I could smell coolant from his engine. If I wanted out, I'd have to move something. Or someone. More infected were visible now. Not a flood yet, but enough to shift the atmosphere from fear to inevitability. They didn't look like monsters. Just wrong. Some were limping, others twitching, many missing shoes, one still wearing a tie. You could tell they were still recognizable as who they'd been. That made it harder to look away. A man in a safety vest stepped out of a pickup, maybe thinking he could talk to one. The creature didn't even hesitate. It sprinted, too fast, and slammed into him, sending them both to the ground. The sound that came after wasn't something I ever want to hear again. I grabbed my tire thumper from the seat beside me and checked the latch on the driver's door. Locked. The steel bars I'd welded into the lower windows years ago as theft deterrents suddenly felt like good insurance. The cab was high, isolated, strong, but that didn't make it safe. Being trapped inside a truck can be a coffin if you can't move. By mid-afternoon, the air in the cab felt stale. I cracked the vent window again and caught a whiff of smoke from somewhere ahead. Not thick yet, maybe a burning car, maybe a brush fire lit by an accident. Either way, the air was turning bad. The father and son I'd seen earlier, the ones with the vests, were now making their way back toward my truck. The kid was carrying a gallon jug, probably from an abandoned car, and the father was dragging a piece of rebar. Both of them looked exhausted but alive. When they reached my passenger side, the father called out quietly, asking if I'd seen anyone heading toward the ramp. I shook my head and pointed north. He looked that way and nodded, then asked if I had room. I didn't. 2 bunks, sure, but one person opening a door right now meant risking every inch of safety I still had. I told him I'd idle the truck again after dark so the noise would cover movement. They understood and ducked low between the cars again. After they disappeared, I sat back, stared at the dash clock, and started doing numbers. Idle burn rate about a gallon an hour, maybe less if I cycled it. 62% fuel meant I could last another 2 days if I didn't drive or run AC continuously. But DEF was at 28%. If that tank ran dry, The system would derate me, maybe strand me even if the road cleared. It hit me that the problem wasn't the infected outside. It was time. How long could I sit here before the truck itself betrayed me? A few cars down, a man tried starting his SUV. The starter clicked, then caught, engine revving too loud. That noise brought two infected from the side of the highway like moths to heat. He floored it, but the car was trapped, bumper to bumper. They reached his window within seconds, slamming fists against glass. It cracked, but didn't shatter. He kept revving, tires spinning, going nowhere. Someone screamed from inside the vehicle, then the horn pressed again and stayed on. After that, nothing. The sun shifted lower, throwing a glare straight into the windshield. My eyes burned from the brightness, so I dropped the visor and turned slightly toward the radio. Tried tuning different stations, but all I caught were emergency alerts, static, and a few shaky local DJs still trying to sound composed. One was reading a list of road closures, voice trembling halfway through. Interstate 49 westbound lanes are closed indefinitely due to civilian unrest and multiple pileups. Emergency services are responding. That word, indefinitely, stuck harder than anything else he said. A group of men appeared along the right shoulder around then. 5 of them, faces hidden behind scarves and bandanas, moving in a line like they'd done this before. They weren't infected. They were alive and methodical, checking door handles as they went. Looters. One had a baseball bat, another a small axe. They worked fast, smashing side windows and pulling whatever they could carry. I lowered the window slightly and shouted that I was recording. Didn't know if that mattered, but it made them hesitate. One of them stepped forward, looked at me for a second too long, then drew a greasy palm across my passenger door. A black handprint. No words. Then they moved on. The air smelled like gasoline and sun-baked rubber. I took another look at the gauges and decided I'd give it 10 minutes of runtime every hour to keep batteries and air pressure up. Between cycles, I kept the windows cracked an inch for air. The sound of distant gunshots came next. Not a barrage, just isolated pops, far off. It came from the direction of the interchange, which told me whatever was happening up there hadn't improved. The father and son came back around dusk, moving slower. They had a second jug now, both still sealed. I passed one of my small LED flashlights through the window gap, told them to conserve it. They offered me half a jug in return. I refused, told them to hold it for later. The father said they'd found a semi blocking the ramp entirely, jackknifed with both lanes closed. A wrecked ambulance lay beside it, doors open, empty stretchers. That meant no escape north. I thanked him for the information, and they kept going, staying low. As the light faded, my reflection overtook the glass. It felt strange to look at myself and realize that the only reason I wasn't dead yet was because of metal and fuel. The infected didn't seem organized. They just drifted. But there were too many. You could outsmart one, maybe two. Not a swarm. Their presence had turned every movement into a calculation. When to shift, when to blink, when to breathe loud. The smell of smoke thickened. Somewhere close, something big was burning now. The wind carried sparks down the lanes, tiny orange dots bouncing off windshields. A few caught in the grime on my hood and fizzled out. I thought about moving, but where? Even if I got the rig rolling, I'd be trapped again 100 feet later. Still, it was better to have control of the wheels than none at all. I started the truck once more, shifted to neutral, and tapped the throttle gently. The vibration steadied my focus. The CB came alive again, faint but clear this time. It was that same calm, older voice from before. The one other drivers called Schoolhouse. Convoy call. Anyone between marker 60 and 72, listen up. We're clearing the shoulder on the west side to reach the exit. Need heavy rigs up front to nudge vehicles off. Stay low beams only. No horns, no shouts. If you can move, check in. For a second, I didn't answer. Then I picked up the mic. This is the white Cascadia at marker 64. I'm boxed in, but can push if I get free. Static. Then his voice. Copy that, white Cascadia. Hold position until we call the move. We'll come to you. I clipped the mic back and stared at the mirrors again. For the first time in hours, I felt like there was a plan. Fragile, desperate, but real. The convoy idea made sense. 2 semis could clear a path faster than a dozen smaller cars. It might even buy us a route to the exit. If it failed, at least I'd go down doing something instead of rotting in my cab. The sound of infected outside hadn't stopped. I could hear them bumping into cars, moaning, dragging feet. Every time one brushed against the truck, it reminded me that the world outside had shifted into something else entirely. My hands smelled like diesel and rubber. The radio stayed quiet except for faint bursts of static and one looping emergency tone. The light on the horizon dropped behind the ridge, leaving everything tinted in dull orange haze. I adjusted my mirrors, double-checked the door locks, and leaned back in the seat. I had no idea if this convoy plan would actually work, but it was something to focus on. Waiting without purpose would get people killed. I'd been on the road long enough to know that stillness invites mistakes. I made a mental note of what to do when the call came. Air up the tanks, disengage the trailer brake, and roll slow. Controlled. No sudden noise. Use the truck's weight to clear the line, not speed. The last thing I did before darkness fully set in was reach over to the dashcam, hit record, and start talking. Not for anyone specific, just for proof that I'd tried to handle it right. Day 1, I said quietly. Westbound lane, marker 64. Road closed both directions. Unknown infection spreading through contact. Holding position. Fuel at 59%. DEF 27. Trailer sealed. Awaiting movement. I paused, then added, if someone finds this truck and it's empty, know that I stayed until I couldn't anymore. When I finished, I let the recorder run for a few seconds and then switched it off. The cab felt smaller afterward, like speaking those words had locked me inside the truth of them. Outside, the daylight slipped away completely, leaving the road coated in dim silver from the moon and the occasional flash of dying hazard lights. I cracked the curtain an inch and watched the line of vehicles fade into still silhouettes. The glow of brake lamps flickered in short intervals where people had kept their engines idling. Everything else was dead dark. The soundscape was a strange mix. Distant moans, low wind across metal, an occasional shout that cut off too fast. I kept the truck in accessory mode so the fan could circulate air, trying not to think about how long the batteries would hold if I kept doing that. My phone had no signal now. The last bar had vanished around sunset. I checked anyway every few minutes, as if staring at the screen might bring the network back. It didn't. I scrolled through photos out of habit, shots of old rigs, roadside diners, a picture my sister had texted of her kid's baseball game. That small bit of normal life made the silence outside heavier. I shut the phone off to save charge and leaned forward to look through the windshield again. The infected were still moving between the vehicles. Their pace was uneven, stopping when they bumped into something, changing direction without pattern. They weren't drawn to light as much as to sound. I could tell by watching one of them walk past a still running car without reacting, then suddenly turn when a bottle rolled across asphalt. He crouched over it, listening. The realization that noise was the trigger made me reach for the key and kill the engine entirely. The sudden drop from mechanical hum to absolute silence pressed against my ears until I could hear the ticking of cooling metal. I tried to rest, but resting inside a parked semi surrounded by the dead isn't rest. You just wait with your eyes open, trying not to move. I lay across the bunk, boots still on, one hand on the flashlight handle. Every 10 minutes or so, I'd rise halfway and check the mirrors again. The night had turned the windows into mirrors themselves. I could mostly see my own reflection with faint movement behind it. Sometimes the reflections looked wrong enough that I'd blink twice to be sure nothing was inside. Around 10, a new light appeared ahead. An orange glow somewhere far up the grade. At first I thought it was a flare, but it spread too wide. Something large was burning. The smoke rolled slow across the lanes, illuminated by the fires of whatever pileup had finally ignited. The heat shimmered faintly even from this distance. I kept my curtain half closed and thought about the convoy plan that Schoolhouse had mentioned. If they were clearing lanes, It would have to start soon before that fire reached us. At roughly 10:30, the CB crackled again. The voice was faint through interference but recognizable. Schoolhouse steady as ever. All units between 62 and 65, prep engines. We're pushing north shoulder first. Keep lights low. Heavy trucks move only when called. He paused. Keep it clean, folks. No horns. Then the channel went quiet. I flipped the ignition to accessory, waited for the dash to light, and then started the engine. The familiar rumble steadied my head. Air pressure rose, needles climbing. I released the parking brake slightly to test the system, felt the truck rock forward half an inch, then reset it. The mirror glass shook just enough to make the distant silhouettes dance. I reached behind the seat for my reflective triangles and set them by the door in case I had to exit. Every sound I made inside that cab felt like it echoed a mile. A few minutes later, faint movement appeared on the right shoulder. Flashlight beams, quick bursts of motion from people moving between cars. They weren't random like the infected. I counted at least 3, maybe 4, working their way toward me, checking each rig to find the next driver who could move. One of them stopped near my front wheel and tapped the fender twice. I opened the side window a few inches and heard the low voice. We're clearing toward the exit. You'll be second push behind the blue Kenworth. Drop the trailer if you can't swing it. I said I understood. He nodded once and disappeared between vehicles. Dropping a trailer in the middle of a crisis felt wrong, but the math said otherwise. A 43-foot van loaded with food and water was dead weight without space to turn. If I kept it, I'd jam the line for everyone else. If I ditched it, maybe the next group could salvage what was inside. I opened the driver's door quietly, stepped onto the step rail, and scanned both sides. The nearest infected were 30 yards back, moving slow. I grabbed my flashlight, covered most of the lens with my palm, and climbed down. The air smelled of diesel and distant fire. Heat from the engine radiated against my legs. I walked along the side of the trailer, checking the wheels. Still inflated, no visible leaks. When I reached the landing gear, I knelt and began cranking it down. The handle squealed once, and that tiny sound made me freeze. The infected nearest to me lifted his head. I waited until he turned away again, then kept cranking slower. The gear met asphalt solidly after a dozen turns. I released the lines, service air, emergency, and electrical, then capped them with the spare plugs from the side box. The familiar steps helped keep panic out of my head. Pull the fifth wheel release handle, check the jaw, confirm slack, roll forward 2 feet. Every driver knows the sequence. Doing it in pitch dark while death stumbles past your tires is just another layer of focus. When the pin released, the truck jolted slightly as the trailer's weight shifted. I climbed back in, shut the door, and let out a long exhale before starting the engine again. The father and son I'd helped earlier appeared near my passenger side, motioning for me to hold. The kid's vest glowed faintly under the flashlight. They pointed toward the lead truck up ahead, the blue Kenworth, where its reverse lights flashed twice, the signal to start pushing. I released the brakes, kept the engine low idle, and rolled forward in first gear. The truck crept like a beast waking from sleep. I lined up behind the Kenworth, bumpers almost touching. Ahead, its driver nudged a sedan aside with slow precision, tires squealing as metal slid across metal. We moved maybe 10 feet every minute, shoving wrecks and abandoned cars onto the shoulder. The infected reacted to the noise, swarming toward the sound, but the truck's sheer mass forced through them. You could hear them hit the grille, the awful thud and scrape under wheels, but there was no other choice. Inside the cab, the heat climbed. I kept the window barely cracked for airflow and tried not to look directly ahead. It was work now. Keep speed under control, maintain contact with the line, check mirrors, and watch the father and son guiding with hand signals from the side. Their courage kept the movement alive. I followed the glow of their flashlights bouncing over twisted bumpers, each step careful, their outlines small against the chaos. At one point, the Kenworth driver stopped suddenly, hazard lights blinking twice. I braked hard and waited. A small hatchback had rolled crosswise in front of him, wheels locked against the median. 2 infected were pinned beneath it, still thrashing. He climbed out briefly, swung a crowbar through the open window to knock the gear into neutral, and climbed back in. Together, we shoved it sideways until it toppled against the guardrail. The sound was sickening, metal folding like paper, but the lane opened. The convoy crawled onward. The smell grew worse. Mix of exhaust, rot, and scorched plastic. I turned on the windshield defogger just to keep air circulating. The CB came alive again with Schoolhouse's voice. Tight now, but still controlled. We've got the shoulder open up to the next ramp. Keep speed steady at 5 miles an hour. Don't stop unless blocked. Repeat, don't stop. We reached the top of the grade around midnight. The glow of the burning wreck below threw everything into orange shadow. I could see how bad it was now. A dozen vehicles twisted together, some blackened down to frames, others still smoldering. The heat made the mirrors fog. Schoolhouse's rig rolled past the wreck first, then angled left to make space. I followed, using his tire tracks as a guide. The father and son ran alongside for a few yards, waving us through before cutting across to another line of stalled cars. Once past the wreck, the road opened slightly. For the first time since morning, I saw an open stretch of asphalt. It lasted maybe 200 yards before ending in another barricade of vehicles. Still, that distance looked like freedom. I tapped the mic. White Cascadia through the burn, shoulder clear for next group. Static answered, then a faint copy. I pulled the truck to the right shoulder and idled. The Kenworth continued forward toward the next cluster. My mirrors showed the line behind beginning to inch forward, guided by the remaining spotters. The infected followed the movement, shambling after the convoy like driftwood in a current. Every engine start drew them closer, but we were moving. That alone felt like victory. At 1 in the morning, the CB traffic thinned again. Some drivers reported breaking through to open highway beyond the next exit. Others stopped responding entirely. I didn't know if that meant success or something worse. I parked nose out toward the off-ramp, shut the engine down to half idle, and let my eyes adjust to the darkness again. The trailer I'd left behind stood ghost-like in the distance, faintly silver under the moon, seal still intact. I hoped someone would use it later. The father and son came by once more, stopping near my steps. The kid was carrying a pry bar now, the father holding one of my flares unlit in his pocket. He said the ramp ahead was blocked by a state truck with its dump bed raised, forming a wall. They thought there might be a way through the median instead, but they'd need time to check it. I offered to angle my headlights low to cover them. While they scouted, he agreed, and they moved off again. As they disappeared into the dark, I shut down the engine fully and let the silence settle again. The fire behind us had died to embers, the sky tinted grey from smoke. I looked at the clock. 1:43 a.m. It had been more than 14 hours since the first slowdown that morning. The day had turned inside out. I realized I'd eaten nothing since breakfast, and even the thought of food made my stomach turn. I leaned back, rested my head against the seat, and listened to the faint rattle of metal cooling. Somewhere far down the highway, a diesel engine revved and then cut short. A gunshot followed, then silence again. The world had narrowed to a series of sounds, each one meaning danger, motion, or both. I stayed like that for a long time, not asleep but not fully awake either, just drifting in a state where every creak or soft impact outside the truck sent a small wave of awareness through my chest. The air inside the cab was stale, heavy with the smell of oil and old coffee. My tongue felt dry. I hadn't taken a proper drink of water in hours, and the small cooler beside me was down to one half-empty bottle. I tried not to think about how much fuel I'd burned. When the first trace of daylight returned, it wasn't bright. The sky was grey and hazed over from the fires still burning along the stretch behind us. I wiped the inside of the windshield with my sleeve and watched the faint shapes of vehicles emerge from the gloom. Nothing moved at first. Then, somewhere down the shoulder, I saw figures. 3 of them, walking slowly toward the line of stopped trucks. They didn't move like the infected. Their steps were even, and one of them carried a long metal pole. I leaned forward to get a clearer view through the side mirror. The tallest of them raised his arm and started waving toward one of the trucks a few hundred feet up. The gesture wasn't frantic. It was careful, deliberate, the kind of motion that said he wanted to talk, not fight. Still, nobody rolled down a window, nobody called back. I started the engine again to check my gauges. 56% fuel, 26% DEF. I watched the numbers as if they were the only proof that I still had control over something. The temperature gauge climbed faster than I liked, the air outside already warming again. It had to be close to 90 degrees, maybe more with the sun breaking through the smoke. I ran the fan for a few minutes, then shut it off again to save fuel. The heat built quickly in the cab, pressing down on me until sweat pooled under my shirt. I cracked both windows an inch and sat still, listening to the dull hum of insects rising with the light. Around 7, the father and son returned. I hadn't seen them since the previous night's push. They looked exhausted, clothes torn, faces streaked with grime, but still alert. The father climbed partway up my step rail, keeping his voice low. He said the crossover near the median was partially open, maybe just enough space for one rig if the cables were pushed down. He'd found another driver willing to help cut them loose with bolt cutters they'd scavenged from a roadside service truck. They were going to try it within the hour. I nodded, but didn't say much. His kid stood a few feet away, holding one of my old flares like a torch handle, gripping it too tight. When they left, I watched them move along the shoulder toward the next ramp. Their steps were slow but steady, and for a moment I envied that they at least had somewhere to go. The CB radio stayed mostly silent through the morning. Every so often, a burst of static came through, followed by a voice calling for any truck still mobile near exit 68. Then nothing. It sounded like someone trying to rebuild order, but the lack of response told me how thin the survivors were now. I kept it on low volume, background noise against the quiet. When I reached for the thermos, the last of the coffee inside had gone lukewarm and sour. I drank it anyway. By late morning, the noise outside shifted again. It started with the dull thump of a car door closing, then another. I checked the mirrors and saw movement. People, not infected, weaving between cars. 5 or 6 of them, some carrying tools, others holding pieces of pipe or crowbars. They were organized. They went methodically from one car to the next, checking inside and moving on. Looters again. The same kind of group I'd seen the previous day, or maybe the same exact people. I ducked lower in the seat and reached for the tire thumper. The air in my throat felt sharp, every breath too loud. They worked closer until one of them stopped at a truck 2 spaces ahead of mine. I watched him pry open the driver's door with a screwdriver, rummage through the cab, then toss something heavy onto the pavement. His friend laughed. The sound carried clear through the smoke, casual and cruel. They didn't care who heard. One of them pointed toward my rig, and the group shifted that way. I sat still and let the engine stay off. The reflection on the glass hid my outline, but I could see them clearly now. Sunburned faces, clothes filthy, eyes alert but wild. These weren't starving survivors anymore. These were men who had already adjusted to the new order of things. They stopped at the passenger side and circled the front. One tried the handle, found it locked, and smacked the door once with the flat of his crowbar. I didn't move. Another looked through the windshield, shielding his eyes against the glare, scanning the cab. When he saw me, he smiled, a quick flash of teeth, and pointed to his mouth, miming drinking. I shook my head once. He tapped the glass again, harder this time. I reached slowly toward the dash, pressed the horn briefly, not a full blast, just enough to make him step back. The sound startled a few of the infected farther down the road. Their heads turned instantly. The looters noticed too. They exchanged a look and then started walking away, heading toward the easier pickings among the abandoned sedans. I sat frozen for a while after that, hand still on the steering wheel, watching as the infected began moving back toward the noise. They drifted between the lanes, slow but steady, drawn by whatever echoes were left from that horn. One of them brushed against the side of my trailer, leaving a streak across the metal that I could see even in the haze. It was the first time I realized how close they were now. No longer distant shadows, but a constant presence around the convoy remains. The world outside had become a slow tide of movement and sound, and every choice I made risked drawing it closer. Around midday, The heat inside the cab became unbearable. Sweat pooled under my arms, soaking the seat back. I cracked the driver's door just enough to let in air, careful not to make noise. The smell that entered was sharp, rotting flesh mixed with fuel vapor and burned rubber. I closed it halfway and forced myself to drink half of my last bottle of water. The liquid was warm, but it cleared my head. My stomach cramped afterward, more from nerves than thirst. I had to think about what came next. I couldn't stay here forever. I turned the key halfway to check my power levels again. Battery still strong, fuel 54%, DF 25. Enough to move if I found a way through. The problem wasn't the truck, it was the wall of metal and death surrounding it. The idea of running the engine now was dangerous, but the silence had its own weight. I'd learned over the last 24 hours that sometimes noise was the only thing that reminded you were still alive. I started the engine again and let it idle for 2 minutes, just enough for the compressor to recharge the tanks. The sound was both comfort and risk. I turned it off again when the gauge reached 100 psi. The father and son returned again just after 1 in the afternoon. They were dragging a section of cable from the median crossover, both of them panting, faces streaked with sweat. The father gestured toward the gap they'd created and said it was open enough for the tractors to squeeze through one at a time. I told him I'd follow when I saw movement up front. He asked if I had water. I gave him the last half of my bottle. He didn't thank me right away, just took a small sip, then handed it to his son, who drained the rest. After that, he nodded and said, "We'll go first. Keep your engine ready." Then they disappeared again toward the break in the median. It took another 30 minutes before the first sign of movement ahead. The blue Kenworth that had led the previous night's push started to angle toward the median, tires grinding over asphalt as it crawled toward the gap. The driver took it slow, easing one wheel over the cable barrier, then the other. The truck dipped into the shallow ditch, the trailer behind scraping dirt as it pulled through. It worked. I could see daylight on the other side. The father and son ran alongside, signaling him to keep moving. When he made it through, he honked once, a short, clean sound of success. I started the engine again and waited for the pressure to build. The noise felt deafening after so many hours of quiet. I eased the truck forward in low gear, following the tire ruts toward the gap. A few infected began to notice, turning in my direction. Their movement was awkward but determined, that same off-balance shuffle that carried them faster than it should have. I kept my foot steady and eyes fixed on the crossover. When the front wheels hit the ditch, the truck tilted hard. For a second I thought it might bottom out, but the suspension held. The rear wheels climbed, caught traction, and I was through. The father waved me on from the far lane. I slowed beside him just long enough for him to say that the road ahead was mostly clear for another mile before another blockage. He pointed toward the next exit, maybe half a mile ahead, where the sign still hung crooked over the road. I nodded, shifted to second gear, and rolled forward. The sound of the engine drew more infected from behind, but by then I was already leaving them behind. For the first time since the outbreak started, I was moving freely. When I reached the exit ramp, the air changed again. The smell of fire was stronger, and the heat from the asphalt shimmered visibly. I turned onto the shoulder and followed the narrow path toward a small cluster of buildings, gas station, diner, and a truck service lot. Most of it looked untouched from a distance, but as I got closer, the damage showed. The gas station windows were shattered, and one of the fuel pumps was bent sideways. Still, it was shelter and maybe supplies. I parked behind the service garage, backed the truck until the rear was against a concrete wall, and shut the engine down. The silence afterward was almost painful. I sat there for a few minutes, letting my pulse slow, and watched the empty parking lot. The father and son were nowhere in sight. Either they'd gone ahead or decided to hole up somewhere else. I unbuckled the seatbelt, grabbed my flashlight, and climbed down carefully. The pavement was scorching under my boots. I moved along the side of the building, staying low, scanning for movement. The main garage door was partially open, high enough for a person to crawl under. I crouched and slipped inside. The air inside was cooler, shaded. Tools lay scattered across the floor, some still clean. others stained with something darker. There was an overturned tool chest near the back, and a row of metal shelves against the wall. I found a few useful things: a box of nitrile gloves, a half-empty jug of coolant, and 2 sealed water bottles covered in dust. I pocketed both and sat on an overturned bucket for a moment, breathing slow. The silence felt heavier here, not peaceful, but expectant. Through the gap under the door, I could still see my truck outside, standing intact, white paint reflecting the sunlight. It looked strong and alive, the last piece of order in a world that had gone quiet. I thought about the dashcam still recording inside, the half-spoken notes I'd left for no one. For the first time in 2 days, I felt the weight of everything catch up. Exhaustion, hunger, thirst, the thin thread of routine holding me together. I stayed seated and drank one of the new bottles slowly, taking small, measured sips until it was gone. The quiet in the service bay was almost too deep to trust. Every small sound I made bounced back from the concrete walls. A soft click of plastic when I capped the bottle, the dull scuff of my boot against the floor. I hadn't realized how loud my breathing had become until I heard it filling the space. After hours on the highway surrounded by engines, shouts, and glass breaking, the silence of this place made it feel like the world outside had already moved on without me. The light from the open door shifted as the sun slid lower. The edges of the shadows changed color, turning gold and then red. That was my signal to move. If I waited until full dark, the infected would be drawn by sound again, and I'd have to run the truck lights to navigate. I wasn't sure if I'd risk that. Staying in one place too long was worse than moving slow. I wiped sweat off my face with my sleeve and stood up. My legs ached from being bent in the cab all night. It wasn't fatigue anymore. It was the kind of stiffness that reminded you how easily your body could betray you if you hesitated. When I stepped outside, the light hit my eyes like a slap. The air was hot and dry now. The fires must have burned out somewhere north because the sky was clearer than it had been in a day. My truck looked the same as when I left it, though I noticed handprints smudged across the front grille, grey with soot and ash. I circled once, checking tires and the side panels out of habit, even though there was no real reason. Habit was still something to hold on to. Nothing seemed damaged. I climbed back up and shut the door, the solid thud echoing through the cab like punctuation. The radio came alive just as I turned the key, the same CB channel from before, but this time it was clearer. A man's voice, steady and low, cutting through static. Convoy regrouping near exit 71. Any heavy units with fuel, respond. The call repeated once, then went quiet. I stared at the mic for a long moment before picking it up. This is the White Cascadia. Still mobile, 53% diesel, 25 DF. Copy that location, 71. What's your status? The answer came after a few seconds. Mixed rigs, maybe 5 total. Clearing the main ramp for another push. If you're east of it, approach slow. Keep your beams off. Don't draw attention. 5 trucks meant a chance. Not safety, but direction. Sitting alone meant dying slow. I adjusted the mirrors, restarted the GPS out of habit even though the signal was dead, and pulled onto the shoulder. The road ahead shimmered under the heat, clear for now. A few abandoned cars lined the edges, doors open, contents spilled into the grass. I steered between them, the tires humming steadily against the pavement. Every sound of the rig moving, the hiss of the brakes, the rattle of the loose straps, the grind of gears, felt like a heartbeat returning to a body that had been still too long. The exit sign for 71 came into view just as the sun started dipping below the horizon. The shadows stretched long across the highway, swallowing the smaller cars. I slowed as I approached, keeping my lights off as instructed. The ramp was partially blocked by 2 overturned vehicles, but I could see movement beyond them, figures waving me in with small handheld lights, red lenses covering the beams. I eased the clutch and rolled closer. When I reached the barrier, one of the figures climbed onto the hood of a wrecked SUV and motioned for me to stop. He was wearing a safety vest and had a radio strapped to his shoulder. I cracked the window, and he leaned close enough for his voice to carry. We're forming a convoy southbound. Refuge point rumored near mile marker 42. If you've got fuel and want to move, line up behind the tanker on the ramp. I nodded once, didn't say anything, and followed his hand signals. Behind the tanker sat 2 box trucks, a flatbed with an empty frame, and another long-haul rig. The line wasn't much, but it was something. The other drivers were ghosts behind their windshields, barely visible in the dusk. One of them flashed his running lights twice. A greeting. I returned the signal. Then the leader's voice came through on CB Channel 19. Convoy 1 ready to roll. Keep 5 truck lengths between units. No unnecessary chatter. Watch for debris and infected movement along shoulders. Keep speed steady at 20. When the tanker ahead started moving, the rest followed. I slipped into gear and let the truck crawl forward, the familiar vibration running up through the seat and into my arms. The convoy moved like a living chain, each driver trusting the next to maintain pace. We rolled through the exit ramp and onto the open road again. The world ahead tinted in fading orange light. For a moment, I could almost believe this was normal highway driving. Just a late run, slow traffic, everyone heading home. But then I saw the bodies along the median and the black streaks of burned-out cars, and the illusion broke. The air inside the cab grew cooler as night settled. I cracked the window an inch for airflow, the scent of burning rubber faint but constant. The road was rougher here, patches of broken asphalt and potholes catching the tires. Every jolt made the mirrors rattle. I focused on the red glow of the tanker's taillights ahead. Staying centered on them was the only comfort now, proof that someone else was still alive, still choosing to move forward. The CB stayed mostly quiet except for short updates. "Sharp curve ahead," one driver said. "Copy," another replied. Short, controlled, no panic. As we passed a rest area, the leader's voice broke through again. "Fuel stop possible at next exit if pump still manual. We'll scout first." I scanned the surroundings as we rolled by. Rows of parked cars, tents pitched hastily along the tree line, and a few figures that didn't move right. The infected hadn't left this place. They wandered between the parked vehicles like insects drawn to scent. The leader must have seen them too because his next words were simple. Negative. Keep rolling. The convoy kept its slow rhythm for miles. My eyes adjusted to the darkness, tracking every flicker of light and shape in the mirrors. Occasionally, something would dart across the road. A shadow, maybe a survivor, maybe not, and disappear into the fields. The headlights we used were dimmed to avoid drawing attention, which made the road feel narrower than it was. I kept my hand resting on the shifter and another near the brake, ready for anything. It was near 9 when the first trouble hit. The tanker ahead began swerving slightly, then slowed. I eased back, unsure what was happening until I saw movement near the front wheels. Figures crawling out from under an overturned truck that had been pushed into the lane. The infected had been hiding there, waiting for noise. They lunged toward the cab. The tanker's driver hit them broadside, throwing 2 off the hood, but one clung to the side mirror, pounding at the window. I could see it even from my seat, the way its arm twisted wrong but kept moving. Then, without warning, the tanker veered off the road, smashing through a guardrail and into the ditch. A burst of flame followed seconds later, a muffled boom that threw light across the convoy. The other truck slowed immediately. I gripped the wheel tighter and held position, not daring to stop completely. Over the CB came a single voice, sharp and fast. "Keep moving. Don't bunch up." The flatbed ahead of me swung wide to avoid debris. I followed its line, steering over the edge of the broken pavement and back onto the lane. The air smelled of burning fuel, thick and oily. The fire from the tanker was already spreading across the grass, its heat licking at the underside of my cab as I passed. I didn't look back. By the time we reached the next mile marker, the convoy was down to 4 trucks. The leader's voice came through again, quieter this time. "Tanker lost. No sign of survivors. Keep formation tight." There was no reaction from anyone else. No one said a word. You could feel the shared understanding. Every driver thinking the same thing. We'd do what we could until our turn came. The road ahead dipped into a long stretch surrounded by trees. Branches leaned inward, forming a dark tunnel that blocked the sky. The headlights illuminated only fragments, broken signs, scattered luggage. A deer carcass long dried out. My eyes burned from focus, but I didn't dare blink too long. The infected were quieter here, fewer of them, maybe driven off by the earlier fires. But silence never meant safety. Eventually, we reached an interchange with a truck stop just beyond it. The leader gave the order to pull off and refuel if possible. We rolled into the lot one by one, engines idling low. The pumps were dead, no power, but the underground tanks might still hold fuel. One of the box truck drivers broke the lock on the maintenance hatch, while another stood watch with a crowbar in hand. I climbed down and stretched, muscles stiff from hours behind the wheel. The ground was slick with spilled diesel, shining under the faint moonlight. I could smell the sharp chemical tang in my nose and throat. While the others siphoned what they could, I checked the convenience store attached to the lot. The glass doors were cracked but not shattered. Inside, shelves were half empty, the rest toppled over. I found a few cans of soup, a jar of instant coffee, and 3 bottles of water still sealed. It felt almost unreal to see anything untouched. I packed them into a plastic crate and brought it back to the truck, sliding it behind the seat. When I returned, the refueling was nearly done. The leader, a heavy-set man with a grey beard and reflective tape on his jacket, walked past, giving short instructions. His face was streaked with soot. He didn't waste time on pleasantries, just checked that everyone had enough to continue. When he reached me, he asked my remaining fuel. I told him 50%. He nodded once and said, "That's enough. Stay middle position next leg. We'll ride through the night." Then he moved on to the next truck. I climbed back into the cab, shut the door, and felt the seat swallow the tension in my legs. The convoy leader's confidence carried more weight than the words themselves. His tone was calm and methodical, the kind you trust on instinct because it sounds like work getting done. For a moment, it felt like order still existed, the old chain of command that kept bad weather and long miles from turning ugly. I turned the key. The engine coughed once and settled into a steady vibration through the column. Gauges climbed, air tanks rose, nothing critical blinked. That small sweep of needles steadied my head. We rolled out with low beams and tight spacing, the leader up front, me two back, a pair of beat-up box trucks between and behind us, then a flatbed, and one more semi limping along. Beyond 50 feet, the night erased everything. No glow on the horizon, no blue from cities, just tail lamps bouncing across cracked asphalt. The CB stayed polite and clipped. Left shoulder clear, pothole mid-lane, debris ahead. I kept mirrors busy and distance exact, letting habit take over. No music, no jabber, just tire hiss and the occasional groan from a loose strap somewhere. Fog rolled in around 2. It came off the ditches in slow curls and then thickened into a white wall. Wipers smeared it, made it worse. My world shrank to a tunnel of grey and a faint red shimmer that appeared and vanished as the truck ahead swam in and out of it. The leader's voice came over the CB, even as ever, saying to drop to 15 and stay tight. Sound dulled until everything felt padded. Somewhere behind us, metal scraped, long and ugly, but the lights behind steadied and nobody talked about it. We just kept moving. The fog broke like a curtain and the valley opened. Strong old trees arched over the lanes and moonlight flashed through gaps, enough to show us the bus lying sideways across both lanes like a barricade. Windows gone, front end shoved into the rail. The leader stepped down with a flashlight and 2 drivers joined him with pry bars. No speeches, just work. We could not muscle the bus. Guardrail on the right was already torn out from some earlier wreck, and the ditch beyond it looked shallow enough to cross if you stayed straight and did not panic. He tested it first. Right tires dropped off asphalt into mud, then climbed out with a grunt of torque. We followed at 10-second gaps, each of us tilting into the ditch, listening to the rubber suck and the trailer drag, then feeling the weight catch and rise. One by one, we made it. Breath came back into cabs you could not see inside. A dead rest area took us in 5 miles later. Burned cars, blown signs, lampposts bent like reeds. The leader parked under trees and waved engines off. Silence hit hard. He counted heads. 6 drivers, and laid it out clean. Bridge ahead likely blocked. Fuel too thin for wandering. Infected numbers lighter in these woods, but not absent. So we hole up until first light. We set a watch. I went second. Someone found paper-wrapped rations in a maintenance closet. They tasted like dry paste, but they stopped the edge. For 15 minutes the scene looked almost normal. Beat-up drivers leaning on fenders, trying not to think past morning. Feet on pavement killed that calm. Too many, moving together. Our lookout whispered from the ramp. We slid behind wheels and bumpers. Engines and lights stayed dead. The infected drifted into the lot and moved between our trucks, pulled by heat and scent. One brushed my trailer and left a wet smear. Another tripped over a curb, fell, and crawled forward using elbows. We stayed stone still while they passed within arm's reach, the fog swallowing their shapes as quickly as it formed them. When the last shape faded, no one cracked a joke. The leader only said that this was why we kept lights off. Everyone agreed by not arguing. Dawn arrived thin and blue. Birds started up in the trees, and the fog lifted from the ditches. The leader said the southbound route was open to the river, and unknown past it. I started the diesel, watched the gauges grab life, and cleaned the windshield with a rag until smears turned into a view. Fuel sat just under half. DF a touch above 1/5. Enough if nothing dumb happened. We rolled out single file. A burned ambulance on the shoulder reminded us what dumb could look like without even trying. The bridge came into view from a long slope and looked bad from the first glance. The right lane had fallen away into the river. The remaining deck was crooked and groaning even with the wind. The leader tried it slow. The concrete boomed under him and crumbled at the edges, but the old slab held long enough for him to reach the far side. He flashed his tails once. I lined dead center and rolled on. Water rushed louder than the engine. Halfway across, shadows shifted at the far guardrail, infected drawn by noise. The leader clipped 2 into the river and made space. I did not swerve, just fed steady throttle as the deck sagged and then flexed up under the rear axles. Behind me, something big gave way. The right lane peeled off and fell in sheets. The 2 box trucks braked in time and would have to find another way that probably did not exist. The leader's tone over the radio was flat and final. We had 3 across. The rest should hold or turn back. Static washed the rest. That was the last I heard from the stranded pair. We turned onto a smaller state road that curled the edge of the valley and slipped into a town that had already lost the fight. Sloan's Crossing had a caved-in station roof, glass-like gravel down Main, and smoke creeping from behind a grocery that would not sell to anyone again. We parked between brick buildings, killed engines, and grabbed only what we needed. I found a cracked water jug and a few cans in a diner kitchen and carried them back across a floor loud with glass. The leader and the flatbed driver loaded something heavy under a tarp and did not explain. He said there was a distribution yard down by exit 94, past Highway 32, and if it had walls and pallets, we might last a couple of nights without bleeding for it. I nodded because forward was the only direction that still made sense. Fields swallowed the road beyond town. For an hour the world felt empty enough to breathe. No wrecks, no shapes stalking fences, just power lines sagging, and birds riding them like a cheap perch. That kind of quiet goes from relief to warning fast. The leader pulled us onto a shoulder that overlooked the river and pointed where a grease-brown column of smoke rose from the east. Whatever tried to hold a line in the city had failed. He said the yard was still our best bet. The heat got ugly again by late afternoon, and the road pinched down into a tunnel of green, where signs turned to rust frames and weeds lapped the asphalt. We hit the yard at dusk. The outer fence stood, the main gate was twisted open, and there were shipping containers stacked like a crude wall near the loading bays. A barrel fire burned small and steady inside. 4 people waited around it with the tired look I recognized from mirrors. Marie and her crew, all truckers who had run out of miles at the same place. They kept their cool, gun low but present, then waved us in. The place had water off a backup tank, a roof that did not leak, and enough wrapped pallets to call it a cache. We parked the rigs nose out and helped pull boxes into a tighter block that turned the center of the warehouse into a bunker. For a few minutes the metal roof took the sound of rain and made it into something close to calm. Trouble announced itself with engines. 3, maybe 4, moving quick on the state road. Marie killed the lamps, the leader hushed us, and the trucks outside rolled to a stop just beyond the fence. Men talked low, the gate groaned, then shifted. Reinforced doors slid into the opening, and a flashlight beam cut the wet concrete. They stepped inside like they owned the place. One kicked the barrel fire over to make his point. The leader did not grandstand. He stepped out from behind a crate, fired once, and dropped the man with the light. The rest scattered and returned fire, rounds ringing off steel and shattering safety glass. The noise drew the wrong neighbors. You could hear the infected answer outside the fence, a chorus that gets louder as it builds. We were not going to hold a long fight. The leader called it, "Engines now, lot clear, back gate." Everyone moved because nobody wanted the other option. We punched out through mud and scrap while shapes pressed the fence. Marie's pickup fishtailed and found asphalt. I rode the leader's tail as the yard fell behind us. In the mirror, the barrel glow turned into a wide orange smear, and then into proper flames as something in the loading bay caught. Infected funneled toward the heat. That was the last I saw of the place and of Marie's crew when they peeled off down a side road. Could not chase every story, could barely keep my own upright. We reached a way station at the edge of South Ridge after full dark. Glass was unbroken, lot half flooded, office locked. The leader tested doors, checked windows, and said we could force it in daylight. We parked tight against concrete, nose out, same as always. Engines ticked down. The night went quiet enough to hear wind run a line across the poles. I recorded a short note on the dashcam out of habit. Exit 94 behind us, still moving, way station dry and intact. Fuel enough for another day if we did not act dumb. Then I shut it off. Morning made the place look better. We pried the office door and found a room that still smelled like printer paper and stale coffee. A backup generator sat in a cage with a half tank and 2 full cans beside it. The leader and I checked lines and oil. It turned over and settled. Not loud, but not quiet. We ran it for 10 minutes, charged radios and phones, then shut it down because noise is a magnet. The vending machine surrendered bottled water after a pry bar did its work. Out on the lot we set chocks, strung a thin wire between bumpers with a handful of bells I found in a holiday box, and walked the ditch for blind spots. It felt like a job site, not a graveyard. That matters. By noon, we had a plan that did not depend on luck. We would stay through the next night, rotate watch, siphon what diesel we could from abandoned rigs up the ramp, and then run south in daylight using back routes marked on a paper atlas Marie's crew had. If the station drew trouble, we had 2 lanes to leave and room to turn. If it stayed quiet, we had a roof, water, and a routine for a day or 2 to heal hands and heads. None of it was brave. It was just adult and possible. I wrote a final line in my notebook and spoke the same into the dashcam because saying it twice locks it down. Day 3. Way station south of South Ridge. Fence line clear. Generator working. Plan set. I did not thank luck or curse anything. I checked my mirrors, checked my fuel, and checked the bells. The leader nodded once from his door like a foreman who finally has enough tools to start the job. That look was better than comfort. It was permission to take the next step without asking the world to be kind. When dusk came, the bells did not ring. We took turns on the roof and along the ditch. Crickets came back. A fox trotted across the far shoulder and did not even glance our way. I boiled instant coffee on a truck stove and split the last can of fruit with the flatbed driver. It tasted like syrup and relief. We talked about road numbers and nothing else. No grand plans, no speeches, just 2 drivers counting miles that did not exist yet. Before sleep, I looped my seatbelt through the door handle, killed the dome light, and slid the curtain shut. The cab settled to a soft tick. Outside, the leader paced a slow line, with a flashlight hooded in his palm. The road held still. The world did not end or fix itself. It just stayed put for a few hours, which was better than good. When I closed my eyes, I knew where I was, what I would do at first light, and who would be there to help do it. That was enough. It was not hope dressed up. It was a simple, workable plan. The kind you can drive. That's all for now. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to like and subscribe to keep the stories alive. For now, stay quiet, stay vigilant, and stay alive. Jack's Nightmares, signing off. Until next time, survivor.